The coffin slid onto the runway cart beneath the pale morning sun, and in that heavy, breathless moment, single dad veteran Daniel Hayes felt the weight of two lives pressing on his shoulders, his own, and the fallen soldier he had promised to escort home. The flags rippled, the engines hummed, and as ground crews moved mechanically, Daniel knew nothing about this day would be simple. He tightened his grip on the worn duffel bag hanging at his side, the one containing the soldier's last personal effects, and reminded himself of the vow he'd made on the battlefield: "I'll bring you home, brother. No matter what. If you believe in kindness, humanity, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name. It helps more than you know." Daniel had been out of the service for 3 years, building a quiet, shaky life with his 8-year-old daughter Lily. He worked security at night, picked up shifts where he could, and tried to pretend the nightmares weren't getting worse. But when the call came that Corporal Mason Rivers, the young man who once dragged Daniel out of an ambush with shrapnel buried in his leg, had fallen during his last deployment, all those years dissolved into a single heartbeat. Mason had no immediate family left except a sick grandmother, and the military asked Daniel if he would escort the body back to her. Daniel didn't hesitate. This wasn't duty. It was love. It was honor. That morning at the airport, Daniel stood tall despite the ache in his chest. The airline attendant stared at him with a mixture of confusion and formality, as if they'd never seen a man in full-dress uniform before. His medals glinted, but he didn't wear them for praise, they were reminders. The flame-scarred one represented the night Mason saved him. The ribbon with faded edges marked the mission they barely survived together. That uniform wasn't an outfit, it was a history stitched in silence. He approached the counter with Mason's documents neatly in hand. Everything was approved, everything arranged. The escort process had been coordinated with the airline weeks in advance. But still, when the attendant glanced at his papers, her face hardened. She frowned, flipped a page, then shook her head with that cold, bureaucratic certainty that strips humanity from even the simplest moments. Daniel felt a pulse of dread. Something was wrong. She told him there was an issue with the escort clearance, something about overbooking and policy adjustments and unexpected operational limits. Daniel struggled to understand. Mason's body was already being transferred onto the aircraft. Daniel wasn't asking for special treatment, wasn't asking for comfort. He was just asking to stand beside the fallen soldier he'd promised to bring home. But the airline worker insisted that escort privileges were not guaranteed, and that Daniel would have to take a later flight, one that wouldn't land until long after Mason's coffin arrived in the hometown they both once swore to protect. The idea of Mason arriving alone, without a familiar face, without the respect owed to him, made Daniel's stomach twist. Lily was waiting at home, and his life was already a fragile balance, but none of that mattered in this moment. Honor had no schedule. He tried explaining, calmly at first, that escorting a fallen soldier wasn't a request, it was a sacred duty recognized by law and by every airline, no matter the inconvenience. Yet they kept insisting policy was policy, rules were rules, and there was nothing they could do. Daniel stood there, the world blurring a little, feeling that familiar sting of being dismissed, undervalued, overlooked, just like when he first returned home from deployment and felt invisible in the land he had bled for. But what the airline didn't know was that grief can grow teeth. And love, especially the kind forged in combat, doesn't back down. As the minutes passed, whispers began to ripple through the terminal. Passengers noticed the way Daniel stood trembling but unbroken, the way the attendant's tone lacked empathy. Some saw the coffin being loaded in the distance, draped in the national flag. Something in their hearts shifted. A woman with silver hair and bright eyes walked closer, placing her hand on Daniel's arm as if silently telling him he wasn't alone. A businessman removed his headphones, listening. A young couple stepped aside, watching. Then another worker approached Daniel quietly, apologizing with her eyes. She explained that the flight was oversold, that they had pushed the company to honor his escort status, but upper management refused. It was a matter of cost, timing, and protocol. They were trying to save minutes and dollars, at the expense of honoring a fallen hero. Daniel swallowed hard. For a long, freezing moment, he stood there unsure whether to scream or collapse. But then he remembered Mason's laugh, that deep, wholehearted one that echoed across desert nights when everything seemed impossible. He remembered the promise sealed in dust and blood. He straightened his uniform, steadied his breathing, and prepared to fight not with anger but with dignity. He stepped back, gathered every ounce of calm he had left, and spoke to the crowd. He didn't plan to. But sometimes the truth crashes out because it can no longer stay locked away. He explained who Mason was, how he died, what escort duty meant. He told them about the letter Mason never got to send home, the one Daniel carried inside his jacket, folded carefully beside a half-burned photograph. He described kneeling next to Mason during his final moments, hearing him whisper about his grandmother, his fears, his hope that he'd be brought home with respect. The terminal fell silent. Even the airport announcement seemed to fade. Within minutes, passengers began stepping forward, offering their seats, demanding the airline do what was right. But the supervisors still refused, citing their policy as absolute. They insisted the matter was closed, even as tears gathered in the eyes of strangers who could feel the raw truth of Daniel's story. That was when something remarkable happened. A man wearing a bright safety vest, a ramp supervisor who had been quietly listening nearby, removed his cap, approached Daniel, and asked one simple question: "Would you walk with me?" Confused but hopeful, Daniel followed him across the terminal, down a restricted hallway, past security doors that opened only with the supervisor's authorization. They reached the jet bridge where the aircraft waited like a massive, silent witness to everything that had unfolded. The supervisor said he didn't care what management had ordered. Some things, he believed, should never be sacrificed for convenience. He personally escorted Daniel down the bridge, ensuring the flight crew understood the situation. The pilot shook Daniel's hand firmly and said no soldier would be transported without proper honor under his command. The flight crew stood in reverent silence, some blinking away tears. Moments later, Daniel stepped onto the aircraft with quiet authority, and every passenger on board seemed to rise instinctively, moved by something greater than them all. They watched as he walked slowly to the section closest to the cargo hold, where he could remain near Mason throughout the flight. Some saluted. Some clasped their hands. Some whispered prayers.